1,000 lords sit on cushions of purple Babylonian wool, their laughter echoing beneath a ceiling plated with beaten gold. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meats, expensive perfumes, and the sweet, heavy aroma of fermented dates. At the center of the grand hall stands King Belshazzar. He is young, arrogant, and entirely secure behind walls that have never been breached. Outside those walls, the Persian army has been waiting in the dust for months, a helpless mass of iron and spears. The Babylonians mock them from the ramparts. They have enough grain stored to feed the city for 20 years. They have a river flowing right through the heart of their streets. They believe they are living inside an unshakable fortress. Belshazzar raises his hand, his fingers heavy with signet rings, and demands a final, ultimate display of defiance. He does not want to drink from the golden chalices of the Babylonian gods. He wants something that proves his empire has conquered not just nations, but the heavens themselves. He orders his servants to bring out the sacred gold and silver vessels plundered from the temple of the Hebrew god in Jerusalem by his grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar. These vessels were sanctified, set apart for the Almighty, never to be touched by profane hands. But tonight, pagan priests pour intoxicating wine into the holy cups. Belshazzar lifts a temple chalice to his lips, toasts the idols of gold, silver, bronze, and stone, and laughs. And then the music stops. The laughter dies so fast you can hear the flickering of the torches. Just above the great golden lampstand, the plaster on the wall begins to crack. From the empty air, a detached human hand materializes. It moves with a terrifying, deliberate slowness. The fingers sink into the white plaster, tracing 4 cryptic words right before the eyes of the king. Ancient historians record that Belshazzar's face turned pale. His knees knocked together. His joints gave way with a primal, suffocating terror. He is looking at a celestial ledger, a divine sentence written in a language his wisest magicians cannot read. A massive clay cylinder, buried deep in the Mesopotamian dirt for over 2,000 years, contains an inscription written by a pagan king. It praises a pagan god for a bloodless victory. But when you cross-reference this ancient artifact with a prophecy written by an exiled Hebrew captive a century earlier, a terrifying reality emerges. The conqueror was executing a script he did not even know existed. We will look at the words carved into that stone. But not yet. This is not a story about a military siege. This is not a story about a surprise attack. This is not a story about political strategy. This is a story about the exact night an unshakable empire found out its time had been measured to the millimeter. To understand how Babylon became so blind to its own destruction, you have to look past the walls and into the deep political rot that was eating the empire from the inside. For years, the supreme ruler of Babylon, King Nabonidus, had completely abandoned the capital city. He did not care about the grand defense systems or the growing threat of the Persian army on his borders. Instead, Nabonidus marched deep into the Arabian desert, settling in a remote oasis called Tama. He spent his days building temples to worship Sin, the pagan moon god, effectively turning his back on Marduk, the traditional protector god of Babylon. This was not just a religious shift, it was a devastating political betrayal. The powerful priests of Babylon felt insulted. The economy stagnated without the king's presence to bless the annual New Year festivals, and the populace grew restless. Nabonidus left the keys to the world's most powerful empire in the hands of his eldest son, Belshazzar. You can imagine the dangerous mix of absolute power and profound insecurity in the heart of this young co-regent. Belshazzar knew the priests despised his family's religious experiments. He knew his father's absence made the throne look weak. To compensate, he chose the path of extreme arrogance. He threw lavish parties, surrounded himself with flatterers, and leaned heavily on the physical security of the city itself. And the city truly did look invincible. Generations earlier, the influential queen mother, Nitocris, had orchestrated some of the most complex engineering projects in the ancient world. To protect Babylon, she had forced the massive Euphrates River into a series of deliberate, winding bends upriver, slowing its current and creating treacherous marshlands that would bog down any invading army. Then, she built massive brick walls along the riverbanks inside the city, punctuated by bronze-plated iron gates that dropped straight into the water. The Babylonians looked at these engineering marvels and felt entirely untouchable. They believed that even if an army somehow crossed the desert, they could never breach the river gates. They forgot that the very river protecting them could also be turned into a highway. Stay with me, because this is where the strategy of the enemy takes a bizarre turn. Outside the walls, King Cyrus the Great arrived with a massive Persian coalition. But he did not build siege towers. He did not launch flaming arrows at the parapets. Instead, Cyrus divided his army. He left one faction at the point where the Euphrates entered the city and another where it exited. Then he took the rest of his forces upriver to a massive dry basin that Queen Nitocris had dug years before to handle seasonal floodwaters. Under the cover of darkness, the Persian engineers began a silent, baffling project. They dug deep trenches, cutting a new channel from the main river straight into the empty basin. They were not trying to break the walls. They were preparing to steal the river. When you look at the sheer scale of these ancient empires, it becomes clear that history is never just a sequence of random battles. It is a canvas where the pride of man is systematically weighed against something much larger than itself. The walls of Babylon were real. The panic inside that banquet hall was real. And the silent movement of the river outside was happening in absolute real time. If you want to understand the hidden patterns that connect these ancient mysteries to the world we live in today, take a moment to subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the moments where prophecy and history collide. And right now, leave a comment below. If you were standing inside that banquet hall, watching that detached hand right on the plaster while an unstoppable army waded through the dark outside, would you have believed the empire was about to fall? Tell me your thoughts, because what happens next defies all military logic. The night of October 11th, 539 BC, was supposed to be a night of ultimate pagan celebration. It was the festival of Sukkot, a time when the entire city of Babylon gave itself over to drunkenness, dancing, and total abandon. Ancient historians like Xenophon record that the revelry was so intense that the palace guards left their posts, the city gates were left completely unsecured, and the streets were filled with a chaotic, intoxicated fog. Inside the royal court, Belshazzar felt a surge of absolute defiance. He did not just want to throw a party, he wanted to desecrate the holy. He demanded the sacred gold and silver cups plundered from the temple of the Hebrew god in Jerusalem. He filled them with strong wine, toasting the idols of Babylon while laughing at the captive God of Israel. Pay attention to this, because at the exact moment the king's lips touched that sacred gold, miles away upriver, the water level of the Euphrates began to plunge. The Persian trenches had done their work. The massive volume of the river was being diverted away from the city and into the empty flood basin. Within hours, the uncrossable moat protecting Babylon shrank into a shallow, muddy stream that barely reached a man's waist. General Gobryas, the fierce commander of the Persian vanguard, did not need to break down the iron-reinforced walls of the city. He did not need to climb the battlements. His elite soldiers simply stepped down into the dried riverbed, wading silently beneath the darkness of the massive river walls. When they reached the heavy bronze river gates, the ones designed by Queen Nitocris to be completely impenetrable, they found something that shocked them. The gates were unlocked. The drunken Babylonian guards had forgotten to drop the iron bars into the water. The greatest defensive marvel of the ancient world had been transformed into an open, empty highway straight into the heart of the empire. Now watch what happens next. While the citizens of Babylon were singing hymns to their dead idols, thousands of armed Persian warriors poured into the dark streets without a single alarm being raised. They moved systematically, securing the major intersections, cutting off the escape routes, and marching directly toward the shouting and music coming from the royal palace. The unshakable fortress had been breached from the inside out, and the pagan gods who were supposed to protect the city remained completely, chillingly silent. Inside the banquet hall, the frozen silence is broken only by the heavy breathing of the terrified king. The detached hand has vanished, leaving 4 dark words burned into the white plaster: mean, tekel parson. None of the pagan magicians, astrologers, or wise men of Babylon can decode the script. It is written in ancient Aramaic, but the letters are arranged in a cryptic, vertical cryptographic grid. Desperate, the Queen Mother remembers an old Hebrew captive named Daniel, a man who had guided Nebuchadnezzar decades earlier. Daniel is brought before the trembling young ruler. He looks at the wall, then looks at the king, and refuses the gold and royal chains offered to him. He does not need the rewards of a dying empire. Daniel decodes the ledger with chilling precision. The original Aramaic words are weights and measurements of currency. Main means numbered. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel means weighed. You have been weighed on the scales of divine justice, and you have been found drastically wanting. Parsin means divided. Your empire is broken, fractured, and handed over to the Medes and the Persians. There is no time left for repentance. Even as Daniel finishes speaking, a sudden roar rises from the outer courtyard. The music in the palace is replaced by the terrifying clash of iron swords and the screams of dying guards. The palace doors are smashed to splinters. General Gabrias and his Persian warriors flood the royal chambers. In the chaotic, bloody dark of that single night, Belshazzar, the proud king of Babylon, is slaughtered before the sun can rise. The unshakable pagan superpower of the ancient world fell without a siege. Its entire history was erased in a few dark hours. This absolute overnight collapse of an eternal civilization echoes a profound collective trauma that would happen centuries later on August 24th, AD 410. On that night, the Visigoths breached the gates of Rome. For 800 years, Rome had never fallen to a foreign enemy. Its citizens truly believed their empire was the eternal fabric of reality itself. When the gates broke, people thought the universe was unraveling. Babylon felt even more secure on the night of her festival until the water stopped flowing and reality vanished. And this brings us back to that massive clay artifact we mentioned at the very beginning of our journey, the Cyrus cylinder. Discovered in the ruins of Babylon in 1879, on this clay barrel, King Cyrus carved his own official history of the conquest. He wrote that the Babylonian god Marduk was angry with King Nabonidus for neglecting his temples, so Marduk personally took Cyrus by the hand, marched alongside his army, and delivered the city without a battle. Cyrus thought he was serving his own political ambition and his own pagan gods. He had no idea that a century before he was even born, a Hebrew prophet named Isaiah had written his exact name into a holy scroll. Isaiah had prophesied that God would grasp the right hand of a conqueror named Cyrus, that nations would bow before him, and that the massive bronze double gates of Babylon would be left wide open so that no entrance would be shut. The pagan conqueror believed he was writing his own destiny. In reality, he was merely turning the page of a divine script that had been signed and sealed 100 years before his first breath. When you look back at that single, chaotic night in Babylon, the pieces of the puzzle fall into a pattern that is impossible to ignore. The pagan gods of gold and silver did not answer Belshazzar because they could not. The stone walls did not save the empire because the judgment did not come from outside, it came from the scales of divine justice that had already found the kingdom wanting. The first truth we must take away from this ancient collapse is that history is not a series of chaotic accidents. The pride of man builds massive structures, establishes global superpowers, and mocks the spiritual fabric of reality. But every empire operates on a precise, divine timeline. God uses the very self-interest, political ambitions, and military tactics of pagan rulers like Cyrus to execute his specific decrees down to the exact hour. The second truth is a deeply personal implication for your own life today. It is easy to look at the ancient Babylonians and judge their blindness. But we must ask ourselves, what are the unshakable walls we are trusting in right now? Are we leaning on our financial security, our career status, our political stability, or the physical fortresses we build around our lives? Babylon felt entirely secure right up until the moment the riverbed emptied out. The things we think protect us can be turned into a highway for our downfall in a single night if our foundation is built on pride. The final defining truth is the terrifying silence of divine timing. For months, the Persian army sat in the dust outside, looking completely helpless. For years, Nabonidus ran away to the desert, and the royal court grew more corrupt. It looked like nothing was happening. It looked like God was indifferent to the desecration of his holy vessels. But the silence of God is never inactivity. The trenches were being dug in the dark. The water was dropping inch by inch while the city slept. When the judgment of the Almighty arrives, it does not give a warning shot, it simply turns the page. Which event in this narrative shook you the most, the sudden fallback of the Euphrates River, or the supernatural handwriting on the plaster wall? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The grandest fortresses of man are only as strong as the dust they are built upon, and when the Almighty measures a kingdom, the waters always dry up.